What happens when you step into someone else's shoes for an entire month? I never thought a simple experiment would change my life forever. I wasn't the type of guy to question how people live, but then I heard about the Beggar experiment online. You know, the one where you pretend to be homeless for a month just to understand how society reacts. Something about it caught my attention, so I thought, why not? It would be a good way to get some life perspective, or at least that's what I told myself. The plan was simple. I would spend 30 days pretending to be a beggar. I was going to dress poorly, sit on the streets, and ask for spare change, all while keeping track of people's reactions. I was curious to see who would help and who would ignore me. I didn't expect anything extraordinary, but I figured I'd learn a few things. The first day, I put on an old tattered jacket, smeared dirt on my face, and sat by the corner of a busy street. People passed by, their faces blank, some avoiding eye contact. It wasn't as easy as I thought. On the first day, I didn't get a single coin. Not a single person offered to help, despite the fact that I looked pitiful. Some people looked at me, but most quickly turned away. It was as if I didn't exist, like I wasn't even there. I felt invisible, and honestly, it made me uncomfortable. I thought maybe I was in the wrong spot, so I moved to a busier intersection, hoping that would help. But the result was the same. People walked past, heads down, not even glancing at me. I started to feel a bit humiliated. I was a college student, middle class, and had always been treated like an equal by society. But now, here I was, ignored by the same people who would normally pass me by without a second thought. After the first few days, I started to question my decision. Was it even worth it? I hadn't received a single donation. In fact, the only person who spoke to me was a kid who asked if I had any candy to give him. It was starting to get uncomfortable, but I knew I had to stick with it. On day 4, something strange happened. A middle-aged woman stopped. She didn't look at me with pity, but with genuine curiosity. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, looking into my eyes. I was stunned. She didn't ask for my story, she didn't even question why I was out there. She simply asked if I was okay. I had no answer to give, so I nodded. Then she handed me a $5 bill and wished me well before walking away. For the first time, I didn't feel completely invisible. It was such a small gesture, but it meant the world. I started thinking, maybe not everyone is cold-hearted. Maybe some people truly care. But even as the woman walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that she saw something in me. Was it genuine concern, or did she just feel uncomfortable with the idea of ignoring someone so blatantly? It was hard to tell. I wasn't used to being the one on the receiving end of charity, and it felt odd to accept her money. It was only $5, but it felt like more, like a tiny reminder that humanity wasn't entirely lost. After a week, I started to adapt to the new life. I grew used to the dirty clothes and the feeling of being ignored by most people. But what struck me most was how differently people treated me when they assumed I was a beggar. I saw people look at me with disgust, others with judgment, as though I was some kind of disease to be avoided. Yet, at the same time, there were those who looked at me with a kind of pity, as if I were broken in some way. I was becoming more attuned to the subtle ways people reacted. I noticed something that scared me. I was starting to feel comfortable in my new role. It was like I had stepped into a different version of myself, one that was invisible but also strangely free. No one expected anything from me. I didn't have to pretend to be someone I wasn't anymore. But then, a thought crossed my mind: was I becoming addicted to this? The idea of not having to live up to any expectations felt comforting, almost like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I wasn't sure whether it was the experiment or something deeper within me. It happened on day 12. I was sitting near a cafe when a young man in a suit stopped right in front of me. I thought he was going to ignore me like everyone else, but instead, he crouched down and said, "Hey, you don't belong here." His words were firm, almost angry. I stared at him, confused. What? I asked, my voice shaky. You don't belong in this position. You're not a beggar. You're pretending. I was taken aback. How did he know? I hadn't given myself away, had I? He leaned in closer. I can tell. I've been where you are. Get up. You don't have to do this. I stood there frozen, unsure of what to say. The guy knew, somehow, that I was faking it. He didn't offer money. He didn't ask for my story. He simply told me I didn't belong, and then walked off. It felt like an invasion of my privacy, like he had seen right through me in a way I didn't even realize was possible. My thoughts were scattered. How could he know? Was there something about me that screamed fraud? Or was it that the way I acted gave it away? That encounter stayed with me all day. The guy's words haunted me, and they only got worse as I spent more time on the streets. I began to wonder what I was really doing here. It was getting harder to separate myself from the role I was playing. It was so easy to get by, especially when I wasn't being judged by my peers. A part of me wanted to keep going. I thought, what if I just kept playing this role forever? There was a certain comfort in being nobody, in not having to worry about how I looked or whether I had my life together. It was like an escape. But then the temptation hit. I was sitting outside a store when a man walked up and handed me a crumpled $20 bill. It was the most money I'd gotten so far. But as I reached out to take it, I hesitated. What if I just kept it? What if I didn't tell him I wasn't really homeless? The thought flashed through my mind. I was desperate for something, some kind of validation. I'd been playing this game for so long, and here was a reward for it. Would anyone even notice? Would they care if I crossed that line? That night, I couldn't shake the idea of keeping the $20. I thought, what's the harm? No one knows I'm faking it. I felt a rush, a dangerous thrill that came from being on the edge of something bigger. But then I remembered the kid from earlier, the one who asked for candy. I thought of all the people who might actually be in real need, and it hit me. If I kept the money, I'd be nothing more than a fraud. I wanted to believe I was doing this for some higher purpose, but in the back of my mind, I was realizing something. Maybe I wasn't just curious about people, I was curious about myself. I didn't take the $20. I gave it back to the man with a forced smile. But I couldn't deny how the temptation had felt. There was a part of me that wanted to break the rules, just to see what would happen. It was scary how easily I had almost crossed that line. I realized then that this experiment was no longer just about other people. It was about me. And what it was doing to me was far more unsettling than anything I had expected. On day 16, I found something I wasn't expecting, a hidden camera. I was sitting under a bridge when a man in a dark hoodie walked by, looking at me for a moment before quickly walking away. I thought nothing of it, until I noticed a small device in the corner of the sidewalk, slightly hidden under some leaves. My heart raced as I realized what it was. A camera. It was recording everything. I had been part of an experiment this whole time, and I hadn't even known it. The thought sent chills down my spine. Were they watching me? Were they testing how far I would go? The realization that I had been part of something bigger than myself felt like an invasion. I wasn't just pretending to be homeless anymore. I was part of a social experiment, and I had no idea who was behind it. I wanted to rip the camera out, to destroy the evidence, but I knew I couldn't. Whoever was watching had already seen too much. I had no control over this anymore. The days blurred together after that moment. I tried to act normal, but I couldn't stop thinking about the camera. Who were these people, and what did they want from me? I felt like a pawn, being manipulated in ways I didn't understand. I began to look for patterns, trying to figure out who was behind it all. Was it a social experiment? A study on human behavior? Or something darker, something designed to see just how far I would fall? Then, on day 20, everything changed. A man in a suit walked up to me again, this time with a clipboard in his hand. He didn't ask me for money, or tell me I didn't belong. Instead, he said, "We've been watching you for the past few weeks. You're doing better than we expected." He smiled, and for the first time, I realized what had really been going on. I wasn't the one in control here, I was just another part of the experiment. I had been part of an elaborate test all along. It wasn't just about how people reacted to me as a beggar, it was about testing my own morals, my own limits. The suit-wearing man explained that they had been studying my reactions, trying to see how a person could handle the psychological shift of living as someone with no power or status. He admitted that I wasn't the first person they had done this to. They had conducted similar experiments on others, and they wanted to see how long I would last before I broke. I felt betrayed. Every action, every interaction I had been observed. Every time I felt compassion or temptation, someone had been watching. It was a sick game. I wasn't just pretending anymore, I was trapped. And the worst part? I didn't even know who I was anymore. Had I learned anything? Or had I just been a subject in their twisted experiment? After the man in the suit left, I sat there, alone, trying to process what had just happened. My head felt like it was spinning. Everything I had done over the past few weeks, the fake hunger, the desperate begging, the desperate pretending to be invisible, it was all part of a twisted game. A game I didn't sign up for. Or had I? I remembered when I first started the experiment. I wanted to learn about people, to understand how society treated the less fortunate. But now, I felt like the one being studied, the one being toyed with. My body was shaking, and I couldn't figure out whether it was from the cold or fear. I couldn't escape the feeling that my every move had been watched. And then, the staring eyes. Every time I walked down the street, I couldn't shake the sensation that someone was watching me. I would catch glimpses of people glancing at me, not in the usual way, but like they knew something about me that I didn't. It made my skin crawl. I felt exposed, like there was no place I could go where I wasn't being observed. I started to become hyper-aware of every little detail. Was the woman on her phone staring at me? Was that man pretending not to notice? I couldn't tell anymore. I felt like I had stepped into a world where nothing was private, and I was just another experiment in a world of voyeurism. At night, the guilt started to creep in. I was no longer able to look at myself in the mirror without feeling a sense of shame. How had I let this happen? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had allowed myself to be manipulated. Not just by the people who orchestrated the experiment, but by my own desire to be something I wasn't. The idea of living without expectations had been intoxicating. I had willingly walked into this world of deceit, where I could be invisible. But it wasn't freedom, it was a prison. A prison of my own making. I thought about the real homeless people, the ones who lived on the streets because they had no choice. I had been pretending for a month, but they didn't have the luxury of pretending anything. They weren't in control. They didn't have an escape. It was wrong for me to play this game, to turn their lives into some sort of personal experiment. I felt sick. My stomach twisted, and the once appealing idea of being anonymous felt like a heavy burden now. My actions had consequences, and now I had to live with them. But how could I make it right? I couldn't go back in time. The guilt was suffocating. It was day 23 when the urge to break free from the experiment became overwhelming. I couldn't stand the thought of being trapped in this role anymore. It wasn't just the experiment that bothered me, it was the fact that I had lost control over my own identity. I had spent all this time pretending to be someone I wasn't, and now I was starting to believe it myself. I didn't know who I was anymore. Was I the college student I used to be, or was I just a beggar with no future? The fear of losing myself to this fake life was terrifying. I started planning my escape. I had to get out, but I didn't know how. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't just quit. It wasn't as simple as that. I had to confront the people behind the experiment, the ones who had been watching me all this time. I had to break free from this cycle of manipulation, but it felt like a mountain I couldn't climb. Every time I thought about quitting, something in me resisted. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the addiction to the anonymity. But one thing was clear, I had to find a way out. 2 days later, when I was sitting outside a park bench, I saw a familiar face, one I hadn't expected to see. It was the woman who had given me the $5 on day 4. She walked by, and as soon as she saw me, she stopped. Her expression was a mix of surprise and concern. "You're still here?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded, feeling like I had been caught in a lie. I'm just trying to make it," I said, my voice wavering. She sat down beside me, not asking for an explanation but offering a comforting silence. I could tell she wanted to say something more, but she didn't. Then, after a long pause, she spoke again. "Are you really okay?" I looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like someone truly cared. She wasn't part of the experiment. She didn't know the truth, but somehow, I felt like she understood. "I don't know," I said, feeling vulnerable. "I don't know who I am anymore." She gave me a sad smile, like she knew that feeling all too well. By day 28, I couldn't keep up the act any longer. The fear of losing myself had become too much, and I had to confront the people behind the experiment. I found the place where I thought they were operating from, a small building near the edge of the city. My heart raced as I approached the entrance, unsure of what to expect. But the door opened before I could knock. It was the man in the suit again. "I knew you would come," he said with a smug look on his face. "I wasn't going to let you leave without finishing the experiment." I stepped inside, ignoring the wave of anxiety that hit me. "You've ruined everything," I spat, my voice trembling with anger. "This wasn't some experiment. You've turned my life into a joke." He didn't flinch. "You still don't understand, do you?" he said, shaking his head. "This was never about the beggars, or about your role. It was about you. It was about your perception of yourself, your willingness to play a part, to escape. You were always going to break, everyone does. The real question is, who are you now?" I stood there, staring at him, unsure of how to respond. My mind was a mess. The lines between what was real and what wasn't had become so blurred that I didn't know what was left. Was this all part of the plan? Had I been manipulated from the very beginning? The man in the suit didn't care. "You've learned the most important lesson," he said. "People will do anything for comfort, even if it means abandoning their true selves. You've proven that." His words stung. They dug deep into my soul, hitting a nerve I didn't know existed. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but I realized something then: I didn't need his validation. I needed to decide for myself who I wanted to be. I didn't need to keep pretending. The real experiment wasn't about how others treated me, it was about how I treated myself. And with that, I turned and walked out of the building, leaving the experiment behind. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew one thing for sure: would never let anyone control my life again. The next few days were disorienting. I walked through the streets, passing people who didn't notice me, who didn't care about me. But it didn't bother me anymore. I wasn't pretending anymore, and that felt like a relief. I went back to my old life, tried to reconnect with my friends, but everything felt different. I had seen too much, felt too much. I was no longer the person I had been before the experiment. In a way, I had grown, but I had also lost something. The old me, how could I ever go back? I visited the same street corner where I had started the experiment. I was no longer the beggar, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that I was carrying a part of that experience with me. The guilt, the shame, the confusion, it all still lingered, but I knew I had to live with it. I had learned something about myself, but I wasn't sure if I could ever fully escape the scars it had left behind. Would I ever feel truly free again? A few months later, I found myself thinking back to the experiment. What had I really learned from it? Was it about the way society treated the less fortunate? Or was it about how we, as people, treat ourselves when we're forced to face our darkest fears? I couldn't answer that question. But I realized one thing: would never look at a beggar the same way again. What did you learn from this story? Let's hear your thoughts. You can equally tag a friend who can attempt this.